It started with a single warning. President Trump stood before the cameras and delivered a blunt message to Venezuela after they detained a tanker linked to an American company. This cannot continue. To the world, it sounded like standard diplomatic pressure. But in the shadows of military operations, wheels were already turning. Just hours after that statement, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, the calm inside the Venezuelan Air Defense Center was shattered by a sound no operator wants to hear. Alarms began to scream across the control room. A faint, ghostly radar return had just materialized 42 miles north of La Guaira, one of the most heavily guarded sectors in the region. It wasn't supposed to be there. It blinked on and off, teasing the sensors, acting like a weak glitch. But as the operators zoomed in, the glitch didn't disappear. It grew. It was moving at a steady 480 knots, sitting at 48,000 feet and heading straight south with zero identification. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't a drill. It was a direct message from Washington. But the terrifying part wasn't that the Americans were there. It was that Venezuela's most advanced Russian-made defense systems were staring right at two B-21 raiders, and they were completely helpless to stop them. The timing couldn't have been worse. The region was already on a razor's edge. Less than a day earlier, a Venezuelan patrol ship had aggressively intercepted that American-linked tanker, sparking a furious exchange between Caracas and Washington. So when that first unexplained signal lit up the screens north of La Guaira, the tension in the room went from 0 to 100 in seconds. This specific zone is a fortress. Every commercial jet, every private plane, and every bird is tracked by sensors from Venezuela, Colombia, and international monitors. Nothing enters this airspace without a radio call. But this target was silent, and it wasn't alone. As the operators scrambled to make sense of the first return, a second, faint signal appeared, trailing right behind it like a shadow. The room filled with warning tones. "Possible hostile pair," a voice called out. Distance was closing fast. The crews manning the S-300 missile batteries, the pride of Venezuela's air defense, were ordered to scramble. They rushed to their stations, adrenaline pumping, expecting to lock onto a rogue fighter jet or a drug-running plane. But as they tried to get a fix on the intruders, they quickly realized this was something entirely different. The radar wasn't just struggling, it was being played with. By 2:19 a.m., the confusion in the command center had turned into dread. The radar operator leaned in, his eyes narrowed at the screen. A minute ago, the signal looked like background noise, but now it was showing something large. He tried to lock it, but the moment his fingers moved across the console, the signal slipped away like smoke. "It changed again," he shouted, pulling his commanding officer forward. The room tightened. More operators plugged in, their headsets buzzing with frantic updates. Altitude steady, speed steady, no ID. The officer demanded the distance, 40 miles in closing. Outside, the S-300 crews were powering up the radar units, their hands shaking slightly as they pulled on their gear. They had the most sophisticated Russian anti-air tech in South America, systems designed to shoot down anything in the sky. But inside the control room, the technology was failing. The second return grew clearer, mimicking the first one perfectly. They were flying in a tight pair, moving with robotic precision. At 2:22 a.m., the S-300 unit reported they were ready to fire. Missile systems were active. But there was a massive problem. The radar wouldn't stabilize. The software would try to classify the track, find a solution, and then instantly drop it. Manual tracking failed. "Something is blocking it," the officer muttered, sweat forming on his brow. Then, at 2:29 a.m., the impossible happened. The radar flashed bright white for a split second before going completely dark on the target. It was a signature drop. Physics says a plane can't just vanish from radar unless it explodes. Unless, of course, you're dealing with technology so advanced it can absorb the waves entirely. The operators were now fighting their own machines. The intruders weren't just hiding, they were projecting false realities. At 2:33 a.m., the main return on the screen split. One signal became two, then snapped back into one. The system flagged it as a possible decoy, a warning these men rarely ever saw. The radar operator looked at his officer with panic in his eyes. This isn't normal. It shouldn't duplicate like that. The officer stepped closer, his face grim. He knew what was happening. The aircraft were throwing ghost signals to confuse the tracking loops. Down at the launcher, the crew chief received a terrifying update. Multiple signals, confirmed before launch. He lifted his binoculars to scan the night sky, but it was pitch black. He knew the sky showed nothing, but procedure demanded he look. Inside, a new faint return appeared far to the west. "Is that a third aircraft?" an operator asked. Another checked the telemetry. No movement, it's a reflection. They were trying to split the Venezuelan team's attention, forcing them to look everywhere except at the real threat plunging toward the coast. Suddenly, the decoy signal became stronger than the real target. The system wanted to track the ghost. The operator had to act fast, shutting off the automatic sorting. "If we let the system decide, it'll track the wrong one," he yelled. He selected the real return manually. It brightens for a second, revealing a wide, smooth outline that sent a chill through the room. "Stealth bomber," the officer whispered, but as soon as the words left his mouth, the image faded again. The psychological games were escalating. At 2:35 a.m., the intruders executed a maneuver that shouldn't be possible for heavy bombers. The second aircraft dropped altitude while the first held steady, creating a vertical split that made the radar struggle to keep both lined up. "They're adjusting formation," the operator reported. "They want to see how close they can get before we react." They were taunting the defense network, daring them to find a solution. They crossed the 15-mile mark. The pressure in the room was now suffocating. Below this point, reaction time drops to seconds. Every operator knew that one wrong call, one accidental missile launch, could turn this night into an international war. The decoy signals continued to fade in and out, pulsating like a heartbeat on the screens. The real aircraft kept coming, relentless and silent. At 2:37 a.m., the two unknown shapes shifted into a direct attack vector aimed at the coastline. The officer watched the radar tone rise into a sharp, continuous warning. Outside, the S-300 crews stood by the tubes, the crew chief's hand hovering inches over the launch switch. He was waiting for the order that would send a missile skyward. But the order didn't come. Inside, the radar feed jumped again. One aircraft climbed, the other dropped. "They're forcing us to split tracking," the operator said, his voice cracking. "They want to test how far we can follow them." They were now at 12 miles. In any other situation, this was the kill zone. At 12 miles, any unidentified aircraft entering this zone is considered an imminent threat of war. The officer raised his radio, his knuckles white. "Headquarters, targets at critical range. Request permission to engage." The answer came back slower than anyone could bear. "Hold for identification." The delay was agonizing. How do you identify something you can't even lock onto? At 2:39 a.m., the situation went critical. Both aircraft accelerated. "Speed increase detected," the operator screamed. The officer gripped the console, bracing for the inevitable. "Prepare for impact range, 10 miles." The radar room was a cacophony of alarms. The missile crews outside tensed, muscles coiled, expecting the scream of "Fire!" The officer lifted his radio again, waiting for the moment he would have to say the words that would change history. The two aircraft moved with complete confidence. They showed no sign of turning, no fear of the S-300s. They were two B-21 Raiders closing in with absolute control. Then at 2:40 a.m., right as they touched the 10-mile line, the radar feed stabilized. Both returns stopped shifting. They leveled out together in perfect synchronization. The officer held his breath. "Hold positions." Seconds later, the aircraft banked hard to the east, turning away from the coastline. "The pulling back," the operator breathed out. The S-300 crew chief slowly lowered his hand from the launch panel. The threat was gone, but the message had been delivered loud and clear. The raiders didn't retreat because they were scared. They didn't turn back because they were stopped. They left because their objective was finished. Inside the command room, the operators looked drained, slumped over their consoles. One whispered the truth that no one wanted to admit. If they wanted to strike, we wouldn't have seen it. For 20 minutes, Venezuela had faced aircraft they could barely track and could never hope to hit. Analysts would later replay every second of the tape, the decoys, the altitude changes, the sudden radar drops, and find nothing in their manuals that could explain how the B-21 moved. The final report was short and brutal. These aircraft held full control. Washington had proven it could penetrate the most sensitive airspace in the region, neutralize the best defenses money could buy, and leave without a scratch. This wasn't just a patrol, it was a demonstration of reach. The B-21 didn't need to drop weapons to win this battle. Its presence alone shifted the balance of power. For the military crews in Venezuela, the event exposed a terrifying reality. Their skies were not their own. And across the region, a new question began to grow in the minds of military leaders. If the raiders can appear and vanish at will, what happens in the next standoff when they decide not to turn away?